Welcome to the Mormon News Roundup, your go-to source for the latest headlines and critical analysis on all things LDS.
Breaking news!
Join D-Vay's
Mormon News Roundup.
That's talent on loan from Kolob every Sunday and Monday night.
We will uncover the truth behind the news that matters most to the Mormon community.
Welcome back to the channel. I'm your humble host, D-Vay's, and that's talent on loan from Kolob. This is the Mormon News Roundup, and today we're going over the Greek Psalter incident. Professor Henry Caswall, a professor, reverend, and skeptic of Joseph Smith, visited Nauvoo on April 18th and 19th in 1842. Caswall claims to have given Joseph Smith a very old Greek Psalter to examine and asked him what it was. Now, by way of definition, a Psalter is a volume containing the Book of Psalms and which often contains other devotional material. In the early Middle Ages, Psalters were amongst the most popular types of manuscripts, rivaled only by the Gospel books. Caswall knew that Joseph was involved with translating other ancient documents, such as the Book of Mormon from Reformed Egyptian and the Book of Abraham from Egyptian papyri. Therefore, Caswall most likely wanted to see if he could trick Joseph with his ancient Greek manuscript. Professor Caswall reported that Joseph examined the ancient document and replied that it was a dictionary of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. Caswall knew Joseph was wrong, as this was a known Greek Psalter and definitely not Egyptian. Caswall says that he took this incident to Mormon apostle Dr. William Richards, who said, quote, "Sometimes Mr. Smith speaks as a mere man. If he gave a wrong opinion respecting the book, he spoke as a mere man," end quote. From the Encyclopedia of Mormonism, we read,
Called the anti-Mormon extraordinaire, the Reverend Henry Caswall published The City of the Mormons, or 3 Days at Nauvoo. He claimed that he gave Joseph Smith a copy of a Greek manuscript of the Psalms and that Smith identified it as a dictionary of Egyptian hieroglyphics. Caswall invented dialogue between himself and Smith to portray Joseph Smith as ignorant, uncouth, and deceptive.
John A. Whitstow, while a member of the Quorum of the 12, wrote the following about Henry Caswall.
He told about the sport he had in fooling Joseph Smith and the people whom he met into believing that a Greek Psalter he had with him was a new find, perhaps a lost scripture for the prophet to decipher. He attributed to the prophet the appearance of a knave and a clown, using exceedingly coarse language. In reporting his talk with Joseph Smith, he forgot that the prophet and many other church members had studied Greek, Hebrew, and other languages sufficiently to recognize Greek script. Such mistakes are often made by those who fail to tell the truth. Caswall's bitter opposition to Mormonism was revealed in the book he wrote a year later.
What is at issue is Joseph Smith's ability as a translator, one of his roles or duties as claimed in Doctrine and Covenants, section 124, verse 125.
I give unto you my servant Joseph to be a presiding elder over all my church, to be a translator, a revelator, a seer, and prophet.
It is asserted today that Joseph could translate with the use of a Urim and Thummim, a peepstone or seer stone, and through direct revelatory means. He could do so unaided by physical media such as plates or papyri. If Joseph was indeed a translator, as God says he was, one would think that he would also be an identifier as well. In other words, if he could translate ancient records, he should at the very least be able to identify the language of ancient records presented to him. There is an acknowledged problem regarding the translation of the Book of Abraham and associated papyri, and in his attempt regarding the Kinderhook plates. The Greek Psalter incident may be another. Joseph Smith Jr. is credited with at least some translation/identification work on 5 different ancient writings. The first 3 are taught officially in the church and known to all members. Here they are. You could also add onto this list the Parchment of John. Joseph's most notable translation is, of course, the Book of Mormon. As the angel took back the golden plates from where the Book of Mormon was translated, there really is little to look at to determine the accuracy of Joseph's translating ability of the Book of Mormon. However, since Joseph translated some other documents as well, it's prudent to examine whatever source documents that may exist for those translations. If it can be proved that Joseph translated other ancient documents correctly, when he would have no knowledge of how to do so, it would go a long way to help validate Joseph's ability as a seer and translator. Most Latter-day Saints are, of course, familiar with the first 3 translations, and some Latter-day Saints are somewhat familiar with the Kinderhook plates, but few members are aware of Joseph's encounter with a Greek Psalter in 1842. Professor Henry Caswall, a professor and skeptic of Joseph Smith, visited Joseph on April 19, 1842. He gave Joseph Smith a very old Greek Psalter to examine and asked him what it was. Joseph examined the ancient document and replied that it was a dictionary of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. Professor Caswall, of course, knew Joseph was wrong, as this was a known Greek Psalter and definitely not Egyptian. Professor Caswall then informed the prophet that it was but a plain Greek Psalter, and Joseph then left the scene. Several people reportedly witnessed the event, and here's a depiction of it in a book published by the professor which discusses the incident. Here is the actual account as shown in the newspaper from 1843.
We lately heard a story which, while it may make us mourn over the depravity of human nature, serves to show, among many similar facts, the low artifices and cunning tricks to which the Mormon prophet will resort in order to impose upon the gullibility of his followers. The story is in this wise, and can be substantiated by respectable witnesses. Some time since, Professor Caswall, late of Kemper College, near St. Louis, an Episcopal clergyman of reputation, being about to leave this country for England, paid a visit to Smith and the Saints, in order that he might be better able to represent the imposture to the British people. It so happened that the professor had in his possession a Greek Psalter, of great age, one that had been in the family for several hundred years. This book, as a relic of antiquity, was a curiosity to anyone, but to some of the saints who happened to see it, it was a marvel and wonder. Supposing its origin to have been as ancient, at least, as the prophet's Egyptian mummy, and not knowing but the professor had dug it from the bowels of the same sacred hill in western New York whence sprung the Holy Book of Mormon, they importuned him to allow Brother Joseph an opportunity of translating it. The professor reluctantly assented to the proposal, and, accompanied by a number of the anxious brethren, repaired to the residence of the prophet. The remarkable book was handed him. Joe took it, examined its old and worn leaves, and turned over its musty pages. Expectation was now upon tiptoe. Brethren looked at one another, at the book, then at the prophet. It was a most interesting scene. Presently the spirit of prophecy began to arise within him, and he opened his mouth and spoke. That wonderful power, which enables him to see as far through a millstone as could Moses or Elijah of old, had already in the twinkling of an eye made those rough and uncouth characters as plain to him as the nose on the face of the professor. This book, said he, I pronounce to be a dictionary of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. The brethren present were greatly astonished at this exhibition of their prophet's power of revealing hidden things. After their exultation had somewhat subsided, the professor coolly told them that their prophet was a base impostor, and that the book before them was but a plain Greek Psalter. Joe stepped out. Such is the manner in which this errant knave imposes upon his followers, and such is the manner in which his knavery is sometimes exposed. Yet, strange that people continue to believe him. Professor Caswall, since his sojourn in England, has published a work entitled 3 Days at Nauvoo, in which this rich scene is represented in an engraving.
Henry Caswall's experience with Joseph Smith at Nauvoo in 1842 expresses the frustration of an increasing number of LDS students with Joseph's ability to translate ancient documents. Caswall was a visiting minister from England who was shown the Egyptian papyri. He decided to test Joseph's credibility by presenting him with a known ancient Greek Psalter for his examination. Caswall, who probably exaggerates Joseph's frontier grammar and idioms, said the following.
He asked me if I had any idea of its meaning. I replied that I believed it to be a Greek Psalter, but that I should like to hear his opinion. No, he said, it ain't Greek at all, except, perhaps, a few words. This book is very valuable. It is a dictionary of Egyptian hieroglyphics. Pointing to the capital letters at the commencement of each verse, he said, them figures is Egyptian hieroglyphics, and them which follows, is the interpretation of the hieroglyphics, written in the Reformed Egyptian. Them characters is like the letters that was engraven on the golden plates.
Caswall told this incident to Dr. Willard Richards, a Mormon apostle.
Whether he spoke as a prophet or as a mere man, he has committed himself, for he has said what is not true. If he spoke as a prophet, therefore, he is a false prophet. If he spoke as a mere man, he cannot be trusted, for he spoke positively and like an oracle respecting that which he knew nothing.
While it is true that we have only Caswall's view of this incident, it is consistent with Joseph's pattern of rather quickly determining the value and content of unknown documents that were presented to him. Professor Caswall published a book called 3 Days in Nauvoo. It discussed Professor Caswall's journey to Nauvoo to learn about the Latter-day Saint peoples that lived there and to meet the prophet to obtain his opinion regarding the Greek Psalter. The book in its entirety can be read online. And here's a few excerpts from 3 Days in Nauvoo.
In order to test the scholarship of the prophet, I had further provided myself with an ancient Greek manuscript of the Psalter written upon parchment, and probably about 600 years old. On the following morning, Monday, April 18th, I took my venerable Greek manuscript of the Psalter, and proceeded to the ferry to obtain a passage. Perceiving a respectable-looking store, or shop, I entered it, and began to converse with the storekeeper. I mentioned that I had been informed that Mr. Smith possessed some remarkable Egyptian curiosities, which I wished to see. I added that, if Mr. Smith could be induced to show me his treasures, I would show him in return a very wonderful book which had lately come into my possession. The storekeeper informed me that Mr. Smith was absent, having gone to Carthage that morning, but that he would return about 9 o'clock in the evening. He promised to obtain for me admission to the curiosities, and begged to be permitted to see the wonderful book. I accordingly unfolded it from the many wrappers in which I had enveloped it, and, in the presence of the storekeeper and many astonished spectators, whom the rumor of the arrival of a strange book had collected, I produced to view its covers of worm-eaten oak, its discolored parchments, and its mysterious characters. Surprise was depicted on the countenances of all present, and, after a long silence, one person wiser than his fellows, declared that he knew it to be a revelation from the Lord, and that probably it was one of the lost books of the Bible providentially recovered. Looking at me with a patronizing air, he assured me that I had brought it to the right place to get it interpreted, for that none on earth but the Lord's prophet could explain it, or unfold its real antiquity and value. Oh, I replied, I am going to England next week, and doubtless I shall find some learned man in one of the universities who can expound it. To this he answered with a sneer, that the Lord had chosen the weak things of the world to confound the mighty, that he had made foolish the wisdom of this world, and that I ought to thank Providence for having brought me to Nauvoo, where the hidden things of darkness could be revealed by divine power. All expressed the utmost anxiety that I should remain in the city until the prophet's return. The storekeeper offered immediately to send an express 18 miles to Carthage, to hasten the return of Joseph. At length I yielded to their importunities, and promised that if they would bring me over from Montrose on the following morning, I would exhibit the book to the prophet. The storekeeper now proceeded to redeem his promise of obtaining for me access to the curiosities. He led the way to a room behind his store, on the door of which was an inscription to the following effect: Office of Joseph Smith, President of the Church of Latter-day Saints. Having introduced me, together with several Mormons, to this sanctum sanctorum, he locked the door behind him, and proceeded to what appeared to be a small chest of drawers. From this he drew forth a number of glazed slides, like picture frames, containing sheets of papyrus, with Egyptian inscriptions and hieroglyphics. These had been unrolled from 4 mummies, which the prophet had purchased at a cost of $2,400. By some inexplicable mode, as the storekeeper informed me, Mr. Smith had discovered that these sheets contained the writings of Abraham, written with his own hand while in Egypt. Pointing to the figure of a man lying on a table, he said, "That is the picture of Abraham on the point of being sacrificed. That man standing by him with a drawn knife is an idolatrous priest of the Egyptians." Abraham prayed to God, who immediately unloosed his bands, and delivered him. Turning to another of the drawers, and pointing to a hieroglyphic representation, one of the Mormons said, "Mr. Smith informs us that this picture is an emblem of redemption. Do you see those 4 little figures? Well, those are the 4 quarters of the earth. And do you see that big dog looking at the 4 figures? That is the old devil desiring to devour the 4 quarters of the earth. Look at this person keeping back the big dog. That is Christ keeping the devil from devouring the 4 quarters of the earth. Look down this way. This figure near the side is Jacob, and those are his 2 wives. Now do you see those steps? What, I replied, do you mean those stripes across the dress of one of Jacob's wives? Yes, he said, that is Jacob's ladder. That, I remarked, is indeed curious.
This incident was also covered in the Mormon-friendly publication, The Times and Seasons. The following excerpt was taken from The Times and Seasons number 23 in October of 1843.
It will be recollected by some that a Mr. Caswall, professing to be an Episcopal minister, came to this city some 12 or 18 months ago. He had with him an old manuscript, professing to be ignorant of its contents, and came to Joseph Smith, as he said, for the purpose of having it translated. Mr. Smith had a little conversation with him and treated him with civility, but as the gentleman seemed very much afraid of his document, he declined having anything to do with it. The Rev. Gentleman afterward published a book, informing the inhabitants of the earth, that he had been to Nauvoo, and had seen the prophet had conversed with the Mormons, and had heard a Mr. Kilburn, a very conspicuous character in our neighborhood, and who, according to Mr. Caswell's account, had been robbed of more than half the inhabitants of Iowa, possessed by the Mormons, relate many wonderful stories. After telling all the tales that he had heard, went to making others in regular Episcopal order out of whole cloth, and published his misshapen batch to the world, as a History of Mormonism. Thus as a reward of merit for publishing detraction and falsehoods already concocted, and adding a very splendid edition of his own, he has proven himself worthy of being exalted to the honor of bearing the sacerdotal robes, and of being raised to the very high and dignified office of curate, in the English Church. He has truly gained himself unfading laurels, and by continuing in well-doing, and assisting some of the Rev. blackguards, whom the Church of England have employed in England to abuse the Mormons, he may perhaps gain further honors. The following we clip from the Chicago Democrat. The Rev. Mr. Caswall, author of the History of the Mormons late of the American Episcopal Church, has been admitted to the privileges of the English Church, under the provisions of a special act of Parliament. He has also been appointed to a curacy.
Now, on a personal note, this October editorial confirms that Henry Caswall made a visit to Nauvoo and talked to Joseph Smith in that year. The editors of this issue of the Times and Seasons were John Taylor and Wilfred Woodruff. Of course, John Taylor is well known for his dishonest published denials concerning plural marriage, 3 times in 1844 as the editor of the Times and Seasons, and again in an 1850 pamphlet of a public debate that he had in France, despite himself taking his first plural wife in December of 1843. So he does not have much credibility, and the denial itself is vague and not terribly realistic, in my opinion. Caswall was educated and articulate with no need to suffer any kind of intellectual inferiority among the frontier Mormons. The oh-so-common "speaking as a man" response from Richards gives Caswall's story a definite air of credibility. And of course, here's a source of John Taylor's dubious veracity.
We are accused here of polygamy, and actions the most indelicate, obscene, and disgusting, such that none but a corrupt and depraved heart could have contrived. These things are too outrageous to admit of belief. I shall content myself by reading our views of chastity in marriage, from a work published by us containing some of the articles of our faith. Doctrine and Covenants, page 330. Inasmuch as this Church of Jesus Christ has been reproached with the crime of fornication and polygamy, we declare that we believe that one man should have one wife, and one woman but one husband, except in the case of death.
At the time of Taylor's declaration, he had 6 wives back in the United States. In a review of Grant Palmer's book, An Inside View of Mormon Origins, the most prominent pro-LDS organization, the Neal A. Maxwell Institute for Religious Scholarship, formerly known as FARMS, issued the following in response to the Greek Psalter incident as portrayed by Palmer.
Caswall wrote that when he challenged Latter-day Saint Apostle Willard Richards with Smith's mistaken identification, Richards responded that, sometimes Mr. Smith speaks as a prophet, and sometimes as a mere man. Knowing that Smith had a great interest in languages and studied them when he could, Richards understood this, but Caswall failed to grasp the distinction. Apparently Palmer struggles with the distinction as well. He takes the episode as evidence against Joseph's ability to translate anything.
FARMS has their usual disclaimer, which they customarily have on virtually every article they published on their website. Namely, the views expressed in this article are the views of the author and do not represent the position of the Maxwell Institute, Brigham Young University, or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. According to an article published on the website of the most official pro-LDS organization out there, they don't seem to question that the Greek Psalter incident took place as described. However, they support Apostle Richard's assertion that Joseph was just speaking as a man, and that Joseph only gave his scholarly opinion to Caswall, thus not really harming Joseph's credibility as a prophet, seer, and translator. The problem here is that when Joseph speaks and leads others to assume he is speaking as a prophet, then he needs to be accountable for what he says. It's very convenient to say Joseph speaks as a man whenever he's proved wrong, and as a prophet whenever his statements can't be proven right or wrong, or haven't been proved one way or the other yet. Joseph did the exact same thing with the Greek Psalter that he did with the Book of Abraham papyri and the Kinderhook plates. He saw an ancient document, one he assumed no one else could translate, but he was just as wrong with the Greek Psalter as he was with the Book of Abraham papyri and the Kinderhook plates. I certainly wonder what would have happened if Caswall had actually handed the Psalter to Joseph instead of asking him for his religious opinion on the document. Would Joseph have come up with additional scripture that would also have some bizarre explanation like the Book of Abraham or the Kinderhook plates? When researching this incident, we can't definitively say if the event actually occurred, as there is so little corroborating evidence of the event, and the primary source is Professor Caswall himself. Grant Palmer admits that we only have Professor Caswall's view of the event. Professor Caswall was a reverend and critic of the church and was looking to find information to disprove Mormonism and its founder. As a church, we put a lot of stock in the testimony of others, so why just dismiss someone else's testimony of events so easily merely because it is critical of the church? As pointed out by Grant Palmer, it is consistent with Joseph's pattern of rather quickly determining the value and content of unknown documents that were presented to him. The newspaper account published the following year. The book published by Caswall called 3 Days in Nauvoo, the artist's depiction of the event published in 3 Days in Nauvoo. The articles or accounts of the event were never disputed by Richards or Smith after the event was published. It's certainly possible if Caswall never even talked to Richards, the apostle would have disputed it. And if Caswall did tell Apostle Richards about the incident, surely the apostle would have mentioned it to Joseph, and if the event never occurred, Joseph would likely have refuted it, but he never did. The Neal A. Maxwell Institute for Religious Scholarship is located at BYU and controlled by the LDS Church. It's the largest and most respected pro-LDS apologist organization out there. Although their answers to church historical issues are not gospel doctrine or official, they are often cited in the Ensign and other church publications as highly respected and probable responses to troubling church issues. As mentioned above, the article in the Farm's website does not question that the event took place, but merely agree with Apostle Richards about the significance of Joseph's analysis of the Greek Psalter. It seems likely that the event happened in some form, as this seems like a lot of trouble for Professor Caswall to go through, that is, publishing the story, getting a cartoonist to sketch the event, fabricating a follow-up discussion with an apostle about the incident, etc. Also, if Farms does not dispute the event took place, then why should I? Caswall likely exaggerated and perhaps embellished some details like Joseph's grammar to make Joseph seem even more ignorant, but based on the above, it seems likely the event probably happened pretty much as Caswall related. If this was the only translational issue that was damaging to Joseph Smith's credibility, then it could be dismissed, but we have a tradition of Joseph being in error about ancient documents. However, given the more substantial translation problems identified by critics with the Book of Abraham, the Kinderhook plates, the Book of Mormon, and Joseph Smith's translation of the Bible, the Greek Psalter incident needs to be scrutinized as well to look for any evidence that Joseph was really an accurate seer and translator. If Joseph really translated the Book of Mormon from Reformed Egyptian characters, and if he really translated the Book of Abraham from Egyptian papyri, then he would know what Egyptian characters are and what they meant. Some defenders of the faith have said that the Greek characters are similar in appearance to some Egyptian hieroglyphics. This certainly may be the case. I'm no expert in the topic. However, since Joseph translated 2 whole books, that's over 500 pages from Reformed Egyptian and ancient Egyptian characters, he would have known that the Greek writings were not a dictionary of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. His simple failure to recognize this casts doubt on his ability to translate ancient Egyptian or Reformed Egyptian characters. Although the Greek Psalter incident is the translation effort with the least amount of significance, it further damages Joseph's claims to be a true seer. It's hard for many people who have analyzed the accounts of all of the ancient writings that Joseph claims to have translated to accept the fact that all of Joseph's translations that can be proved as accurate have all been proven to be incorrect. If nothing else, it was another opportunity for Joseph to prove himself himself to be a seer that he failed. There's certainly a difference between an isolated incident and a pattern. The Greek Psalter, Book of Abraham, Kinderhook plates, the Anthon manuscript, and some would add the Book of Mormon, that is the DNA evidence, anachronisms, lack of archaeological foundation, anthropological issues, cultural, linguistic, and metallurgical lack of evidence, reveals a disturbing pattern in Joseph Smith's methods and perhaps his character. The testimony of his mother about his ability to spontaneously make up stories about ancient inhabitants of the Americas and the story that he told about Zelph the White Lamanite while on the Zion's Camp March to Missouri are consistent with his hyperbolic pattern. Joseph seems unable to resist the opportunity to appear as an expert, whether he was qualified to offer expert analysis or not. This pattern of deception can also be seen in his tendency to use prevarication to cover up his polygamous activities. It raises serious questions in those who are fair-minded and objective about Joseph Smith's believability and credibility. And that's a wrap for today's episode of the Mormon News Roundup. We've delved into a fascinating array of topics, from the historical context of the Book of Mormon to the intriguing details of Joseph Smith's translational abilities. We also unpacked the Greek Psalter incident involving Professor Henry Caswall, which casts a critical eye on Joseph's translational abilities and raises serious questions about his prophetic claims. And by way of transparency, I want you to know that much of this episode's information came from Mormon Think's essays. And to wrap things up, here's a quick recap. We've explored the Mormon Think perspective, examined historical and doctrinal aspects, and discussed how much media and church essays portray and address these issues. The Greek Psalter incident, where Joseph Smith misidentifies a Greek manuscript as Egyptian, serves as a notable case study in evaluating Smith's translational skills and prophetic credibility. We've seen that while defenders argue this might simply be the case of Joseph Smith speaking as a man rather than a prophet, critics view it as indicative of a pattern of problematic translational claims. The incident underscores ongoing debates about the accuracy and authenticity of Joseph Smith's translations, especially in light of other controversial translations like the Book of Abraham and the Kinderhook plates. As always, we encourage you to explore the sources and perspectives we've discussed. Check out the links in the description for more in-depth information on Mormon Think, the Greek Psalter incident, and other related topics. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you found this episode enlightening. Please share your thoughts and questions below. I'd love to hear what you think about today's topic. Until next time, stay curious and keep questioning, and remember, no unhallowed hand can stop this podcast from progressing.
When it comes to nicknames of the church, such as LDS Church, the Mormon Church, to remove the Lord's name from the Lord's church is a major victory for Satan.
Satan.